Welcome, this is Possibilities. My name is Cecil Walker.
And I am Adam Froer.
And today we're going to be chatting about how to rewire your brain, how to come at your life circumstances from a different angle and kind of develop a new relationship with it. So I guess some scene setting might be in order. What do we mean by rewiring your brain, forming a new relationship with whatever is going on in your life?
I really don't think it's fair. You always get to ask me the first question. But I think what I would say is, I'll put it, I think, into perspective within kind of a neuroscience perspective at first. So I think when we think about like rewiring our brains, I think that brings up then like, how are they wired in the first place? And I think at a really kind of just fundamental level, there are cells in our brains, right, and those cells are connected in various ways. If I experience something, then the sight part of my brain connects that stimulus to the hearing part of my brain, and that is then connected to like the emotional part of my brain, like what emotion am I feeling at that point. So all the different parts of our brain kind of get, I think this is where the term wired comes. They get connected, and that's how we form kind of a perception of like, I just had this experience, or I just learned this thing. And so that connecting process, I think, is always happening. It's always changing. One of the terms that comes up in this kind of arena is the term neuroplasticity. Mm-hmm. And that term basically just means the way that those cells in your brain are connected is constantly changing. Sometimes those changes happen for good reasons. Sometimes those changes happen because of difficulty or challenge. Mm-hmm. But that change is always happening. And one of the things I think that is connected, which will probably come up a little bit later as we talk, is there's also a pruning process of things that were connected at one point. Mm. We don't experience that enough for it to be like, this is a meaningful thing that I need to hold on to, that I need to remember. And so those cells kind of prune that connection, and they say we're gonna dedicate energy and attention to connections that are more meaningful and impactful. So I think as we think about like, what do we mean by rewiring, at the very like fundamental level, we're just talking about how do all of the parts in your brain come together and connect in meaningful ways.
Yeah, I like that description of it because before we even get into the how of anything, that just firmly declares change is possible, and the basic makeup of our cells allows for change. It's just built into how these cells function, how our brains operate, that change is to be expected over time. We'll feel differently about something, we'll think differently about something. The paths of our brains are wired, or at least are built for the capability of being wired differently, mm-hmm, of pathways being formed that maybe weren't there before. And old pathways being able to be weakened or less used. And so just the idea that change is possible and built into our systems, I think already lays the foundation for something important here in this conversation that we're talking about. Because that says that the way you're feeling right now does not have to be the way that you're stuck feeling. Whatever sense of fear, guilt, defeat, whatever it is that you might be feeling, you are bound to feel differently, mm-hmm, about that over time as you kind of maneuver your neural relationship with that, or your kind of literal emotional relationship with those things.
Yeah, I think you used the phrase like change is possible. And I think I would even take it one step farther and say, in some sense, change is inevitable. Mm. Change is always happening. And I think some examples, right? I think if we lose somebody to death,
Yeah.
right? Initially it's a very strong emotional experience, and it's kind of all consuming of what we think and what we feel and how we experience life, and everything seems to go through that filter of, I just lost somebody really important to me. But with time, the sting of that loss is lessened a little bit. The amount of time that is dedicated to thinking about that person and what I've lost diminishes. But I might still at times like hear a song that really reminded me of that person, and so the memory will come back. So over time, the impact of that loss changes, the meaning of that loss changes, and that's almost an inevitable process. And so I think one of the things that we're really saying is, like, how do you be intentional, or how do you make the most or influence that change in a way that's going to be meaningful and helpful? If I use that same example of losing somebody, I can either grieve and feel a sense of defeat and an incredible sense of there's something missing in my life, or with some intentional rewiring, it can be a positive memory. It can be a sense of gratitude. It can be a sense of, I'm grateful for the time that I did have, the lessons and the experiences that I got to learn with that person. So a lot, I think, too, of what we're describing here is perception, and I can perceive an experience in a particular way, and that's going to influence how my brain is wired. Which will then go on to then perpetuate how I experience that thing over and over and over again.
Yeah. It's I think this is precisely what people come to therapy for. The whole point of our jobs even existing is it's really just not possible for us to remove the problems from people's lives, to remove whatever bumps they've experienced along the way. You can't remove the death of a loved one. You can't change what kind of childhood they had. You can't go reach into their lives and change the people around them who might be mistreating them or causing them conflict. You can't do anything really about the sources of the negative emotions that people might feel, the reasons why they feel like they need therapy. So what else is there that might lead someone to come to this process and say, I want something to be different, other than I want to experience my life differently, like you phrased it. I want to have a new perspective on this, to think differently, to feel differently, to feel like I have a different kind of relationship with these things as they have already happened or continue to happen, or even future things that might come up as well. And I think there's really no point where you could say in therapy, like, you've fixed all your problems, regardless of whatever approach I think you come with as a therapist. There's no way to say you fixed all your problems, but you can say you are different in how you deal with the presence of problems, how you deal with the presence of those things in your narrative too. Those can be dramatically different. Those can be changed to where maybe now you feel like you're someone who's triumphant, you're someone who is strong, who can deal with things as they come up, who continues to deal with things, rather than someone who feels like life has been unfair, feels like things are constantly taken away from you, feels like you're overwhelmed. I think that is the whole point of, and not just therapy, but self-help books for trying to watch feel-good stories and learn what am I supposed to do to come out on top. We want to re-experience our lives in a better way, and the only way that is possible is while simultaneously accepting that you can't change the objective pieces of what's happened or what's present in your life.
Yeah, you reminded, I think one of the things you said that really struck me is changing, if we put it into the language of rewiring, really one of the first steps is to have that desire, right? And I think oftentimes, ironically, the desire comes with discomfort. I become uncomfortable with the way that it is, or the way that I'm feeling, or the perception that I have. And that discomfort then leads to a desire of like, I want something to be different. I want change to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think you're right. You talked about it as like, this is one of the reasons most often that people come to therapy. And I think that's true. They're sitting in a moment of discomfort and they say, I want this experience to change. I want something different. And I think that then helps to understand, like, if we get into so how do you do it? How do you rewire your brain? It makes sense that in the kind of therapy that we do, solution-focused brief therapy, we begin with, what are you hoping for? What do you want? And I think that initial stage sounds, of course you're going to start there, but I think oftentimes people overlook that step.
Mm-hmm.
I think people oftentimes just think, well, I want what I have to be different. But they don't think, well, what do I want to feel instead of this? Or what am I really hoping will be different?
Yeah.
And so I think the first step of this rewiring process is really to take stock and to say, what if I could rewire this, if I could experience these difficulties, these challenges in a new and different, in a better, in a more satisfying way, what would I want to feel? What would I want to experience? How would I want to see this experience? And sometimes that's hard because it's almost like you're walking into the unknown, right? It's hard to articulate what you want if you're not currently feeling that thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think what I would say is it does take an incredible amount of intentionality to say, I'm going to sit here for a moment in what it feels uncomfortable. I'm going to really think about if I could turn this situation into something that's good for me, that's pleasurable, that's satisfying, what circumstances would I want to be present? That initial desire and that initial kind of clarity and understanding, I think, is an important first step to everything else that comes.
Yeah, I think that's brilliant. And as simple as it sounds, that's just not where our heads usually are when we are facing discomfort, when we are facing a really tough moment. It's like in those really tough moments, our knee-jerk reaction is just pushing back against everything.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want that, I don't want that, I don't want to feel like this, I don't want to go there, I don't want to do this. I don't want to be here in this place. And I think it's not so organic that we would stop in that moment and say, what do I want instead? Who do I want to be? What do I want to be doing?
Mm-hmm.
What do I want to be feeling instead of this? And it's so simple, but I think so powerful, because then it allows you to have a target, to have a place to move towards, to have a purpose for what you're doing as you're navigating this difficult thing. Because I don't think pushing back on something, saying I don't want to feel that, is purpose enough
Mm-hmm.
to get through it. If you're dealing with grief like you were talking about, and the only thing that's at the center of your mind is I don't want to feel this pain and I don't want to lose this loved person, that is hard to carry through that moment, because it's instantly always going to be met with, but you are.
Mm-hmm.
This person is gone and you are feeling this pain.
Yeah.
So that purpose doesn't get you anywhere, if you could even call that purpose. But if you were saying, I want to feel like I've found peace, that I'm living in a way that this person is proud of me, that I'm doing our relationship justice, that I'm being the kind of person that they always wanted me to be, or that I know that they would be pleased to see me being. That purpose could take you eons. That could take you, all across the rest of your life, wherever you need it. And it won't be instantly met with a reason why that can't exist, a reason why that's not enough. And so, as simple as it seems, I think it instantly flips you from an insufficient place to a more than sufficient place.
Yeah, I think that's really beautiful, and it kind of takes me back to what we were saying before of like change being inevitable. In some sense, I think about like if you take that moment and you think, okay, no matter what, my circumstance is going to change.
Mm-hmm.
So I now have some control, I have some influence over how is it going to change? How am I going to go through this process? And doing those things that you just talked about, like those questions that you asked, are so beautiful and profound, right? Instead of it being like, I'm so sad that I lost this person, if you spent time thinking about how could I do the relationship that we had justice, how could I show the world that this was a meaningful relationship to me? What a powerful shift. And I can't think of anything that would be more helpful than in a moment of grief to say, how do I do this relationship justice? So I think, again, kind of in that very simple way, one way to kind of kickstart this rewiring is to pause and say, despite what I'm feeling right now, despite what I'm experiencing right now, what do I want? What do I want? And having a meaningful relationship is something really desirable. And so I think I really like those questions. If you didn't catch all those questions, go back and listen to them again, and then put it into the context of like, I have some influence over what my experience is going to be like.
Yeah, and I think if it's not already clear, this applies to any circumstance, I think, that someone could find themselves in. It's not just grief, but it's, you are deeply dissatisfied with your job, you are in a difficult relationship, you're going through a period of depression, or you're just having a lot of anxiety, whatever it is that you're dealing with. I think it's possible to come at it from a different angle. It's possible to do this flip that we're talking about and talk about who I want to be, how I want to be living as I'm dealing with this thing. But since this is a how do we do this type of a thing, once you've kind of begun to define, here's what I do want to feel, here's what I do want to do, here's the purpose that I have now, rather than just the scary thing I'm trying to push away from, what do we do with that? Where do we go after that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think we take that intentionality and kind of move forward. I think one of the things that I would say about this process is, again, go back to where we started with, like, all of the different parts of my brain are coming together and making meaning of this, right? Certain sounds, certain smells, certain tastes, certain emotions. Yeah. And I think if you take a minute and you say, okay, so what do I really want? And even if it was just a mental exercise of like really being clear and laying out, okay, what sounds would I hear if that was my reality? I'll go back to that example of like honoring this relationship. Like perhaps that means I listen to meaningful music that we have. Maybe I go to a place that we really enjoyed and I listen to the sounds that that accompany that place, right? Or if I think about like what kind of feelings would accompany honoring this relationship, it would be one of, I'm guessing, something like love and compassion, and maybe this person was a really generous person. So you hear about a lot of people who give donations or whatever in honor of somebody else. And so I think part of it is like thinking about all of the different parts of our brains and thinking about our emotions and saying, if I got what I wanted and it was so comprehensive that it encompassed every inch of my brain, what would that be like? And first, I think it's just like envisioning that process, but then even going the next step further and then experimenting with it, right? Of saying, okay, so I'm going to go to that place and I'm going to sit there and I'm going to listen to the sounds that I hear, or I'm going to journal and I'm going to just exude all of the emotion that I would love to exude, right? So whatever it is, give your brain an opportunity to experience what it is that you want to experience in connection with where do you want to go. So you really have ultimate control of, if I go into this thinking I want this, and I create experiences that give sight, sound, smells, taste that can be associated with that, I have begun very intentionally to rewire what memories are connected and what senses are connected. But again, I think it starts with, you have to be really clear about what it is that you're creating so that you can give your brain kind of an immersive experience of experiencing that thing.
Yeah, it sounds like we're really describing just the ultimate roadmap for how to get from where you are to where you want to go, how to find change that is pleasing with you. And it, of course, I remember doing some reading once. I don't remember where it was. Maybe a book, maybe an article or something. I should be able to cite sources better than I do. But it was talking about desire. Desire in the most general sense, not even just, purposeful desire, like for who you want to be, but desire in like objects you want, food you want to eat, things you want to own. And of course, it has to be initiated by, I want that thing, whatever that is. It's a slice of pie, it's a lunch, it's a house, it's a sense of ambition, whatever. It starts with I want, just like you were describing. And then that initiates this kind of cascade of perceiving the things that you want that go along with that. You're picturing that meal that you want that would be so satisfying to you. You kind of get just a quick glimpse of what it would be like to be in the life of the person owning that house that you want, or to be working the job that you want. And that natural process automatically like pumps this sense of ambition inside of you, the sense of motivation of that would be so pleasing that I just get a little extra energy wanting from thinking about that makes me want to go out and get that thing. And oftentimes that turns into, I don't know why, but now I'm pulling into McDonald's to get, whatever the thing is that I was kind of picturing, or I just have to have that slice of cheesecake or something, or, but sometimes it also looks like actually much more fulfilling things than that. Sometimes it looks like that's when I signed up for law school. That's when I called, that family member that I wanted to kind of reconcile things with. And so I think what you're describing isn't just a philosophical ideal or this nice therapeutic method. It's like built into the ways that our brains actually work. It's built into the biological processes that are just inside of us. And it requires these steps of knowing what you want, knowing how you want to feel, and those kinds of things. And then also beginning to really deeply depict what that looks like and what it's like to be inside of that experience. And the thing that I'll add on to that I think makes it even easier to kind of picture and start to embody this change is to kind of think about what's the version of yourself that you have to be to experience your life in this kind of a way. If nothing else changed except me, what are the parts of myself I'd have to call on and make use of to be able to experience this situation in this kind of a way? If we keep coming back to this grief experience, if I'm dealing with grief, I know it hurts right now. I don't know when it'll stop hurting. So what's the part of myself I have to call on to deal with this hurt as I'm still working towards all those beautiful things I said I want to be having in this experience with this grief? Well, maybe I'd have to be pretty patient. I'd have to wait out this pain and see what happens. Well, I've been patient at work. I've been patient in relationships. I've been patient, just in my ordinary life, waiting in line or waiting for whatever. So I could do that. I could call on that patient part of myself to deal with this kind of a thing. I could also call on the part of me who is willing to do tough things for the people I love. For the sake of this loved one who's deceased, I'd be willing to deal with this type of pain if it means I'm fighting through to honor that relationship, or I'm fighting through to see some good come out of this process overall. So I feel like that's such a powerful accelerator, is when I think of what are the versions of myself, the parts of myself that I got to use to be able to fulfill this type of experiencing this thing, if nothing else changes, if the obstacles in my way don't get any easier.
Yeah, I think as you were talking, a really different example came up, which is somebody dealing with trying to overcome an addiction. And one of the things one of the hallmarks of addiction are, I guess, what I would call obsessions, right? It's this like constant thought of, how do I secure whatever my drug of choice is? What's it going to be like when I use? Where am I going to be? And then in the moment of use, it almost becomes thoughtless, right? I engage in that behavior without even thinking about it because there's been so much lead up in thinking about it, obsessing about it, planning it, making sure that it can happen, that then when it happens, it's an inevitable ending to all of this thought. And then oftentimes what happens then is the regret and the remorse and like, I can't believe I've done this, I've let myself down again, or when can I get it again? Because I don't want to experience the negative side effects of not having it, right? So then almost immediately the obsessions I use, and then almost immediately the obsessions come back. And in that example, you can hear like I'm walking down this memory path, I'm walking through this thought process over and over and over, and it becomes so ingrained that some people think, well, how it's almost impossible to interrupt that process. And I think the reality is it can be very difficult to interrupt that because, again, it's wired that way and you've walked that path so many times. But the reality is, if that path could get so established simply because of how much time and energy I've put into thinking about it, if I put in equal time and energy into thinking about and planning and executing, some other strategy, if I wasn't doing drugs or if I wasn't addicted to something, what would I do instead? And if I begin almost to obsess about that, right?
Yeah.
You hear about like athletes who think about matches and who play them out in their heads, or who work tirelessly to develop the most minute skill, whatever it happens to be, and they think and think and think about it, and that's one of the things that contributes to them getting to the top of their game. In reality, it's exactly the same process. Addiction and becoming a superstar in your chosen sport, the amount of thought, the energy of thought, the amount of dedication and the visualization of it all, really it's the same. The only outcome that's different is the behavior. In one case, maybe it's drugs. In one case, it's performing athletically. So with that understanding that I have then control, the more I can dedicate my time and energy to focusing on what I want and really picturing that over and over and over and really making it as clear as possible, as detailed as possible, it then it becomes inevitable. Again, remember, going back to what we talked about at the very beginning, there's a pruning process that happens. And if I dedicate less time to thinking about addiction and substances and those kinds of things, and I start dedicating a lot of time and energy to what's life going to be like when this isn't in place, then pruning starts to happen over here because I got to build all of these networks over here. And so I think as you were talking, that was one of the things that really stood out to me is like, I have a lot of control over my thoughts and how much time and energy I focus on a thing. It might be very difficult because thoughts become intrusive, right? But if I'm intentional in saying, I don't want to think about that, I'm going to think about this instead, the more clear image I have of it, the easier it is for me to really dedicate time and energy into building that new network.
Yeah. I think you described that really, really well. And the thing that I would add on to that too is, as you're aiming to prune this addiction or this thing that you don't want, this negative perspective, and grow this other more useful, more pleasing perspective, maybe even a healthier perspective, switching from one to the other, going from the negative to the positive, doesn't have to be a complete restart where you're starting from the beginning now, you're at zero. I've had this neural pathway, this is the way that I've done things and thought about things and felt about things, and now I gotta totally go and start and build a new one. I think the likelihood is that these are just smaller. These are pathways that are maybe overlooked sometimes or only in certain parts of your lives that you've been able to amplify. And for the most part, in in particular instances or in the majority of your life, whatever it is, this negative pathway is the one that's being emphasized. And so it's not a matter of going from here's how I always think and feel to I got to start a totally brand new way and figure out a way to get that to get bigger and that to be that to be the way that I use more often. But it might be a matter of just noticing these ways exist somewhere in some capacity, and I just got to water them a little. I just got to get them to kind of grow a little bit more while that one prunes itself over there. People who have, an alcohol addiction, there's obviously different intensities of addictions, different degrees, and how those things show up. But people who are over drinking tend to have some period somewhere in their day, in their week, where alcohol is not what's happening. Maybe they've managed to not drink at work. Maybe they manage to not drink when they're driving their kids to school. Maybe they manage to not drink for the first couple of hours of the day. Maybe they manage to not drink when they're visiting their mom or going to church with their family. Whatever the situation is, there's got to be a pocket somewhere where a drink isn't in their hand. And I think noticing, well, why is that so possible? Why is the urge not so overwhelming in that moment? Who am I? What am I feeling? What's going on? What allows that to happen? So as this negative side is being pruned and starting to shrink, I think feeling like you can just grow a part of you that's already there, this pathway that's already there. And because our neurology is so complicated too, it's intertwined with things, right? It's like when I see my kids or think of my kids, the urge to drink is less relevant. When I'm in this situation that makes me feel like I have more of what I need, I'm more satisfied in some kind of a way, and there isn't an emptiness that needs to be filled with an addiction, I just need to grow those things. I'm not starting from scratch. I'm just noticing where it's already possible and trying to make that neural pathway more prevalent.
Yeah, as you talk, one of the things that comes to my mind is that's such a hopeful perspective. That's such a hopeful stance. If I'm not starting from ground zero, that there's hope present. If just by focusing over here, that over there is going to get pruned naturally, then that's so hopeful. If I have the ability to kind of grow it and grow it and grow it, that's such a hopeful perspective. And I think that's one of the things that is so amazing about the ability to rewire, is that really what we're saying is we can watch that hope turn into just like an aspiration and instead turn it into action and into motivation and into change in our thoughts, and all of a sudden something that I want becomes something that is a reality, because this natural course of neuroplasticity just happens. If I can bring this into focus over here, by nature that becomes less in focus over there. That's an incredibly hopeful place to begin, I think.
I agree, yeah. And I think it's one of those things where instead of having this other perspective, which I think leads to finding all the reasons why that perspective is justified, when you hold this new perspective, this new way of experiencing whatever your circumstances are, you'll begin to find all of the reasons why that's a good perspective to hold. And so it starts to accelerate itself. It starts to build itself up kind of exponentially. And you can't help but to see that you are pleased with being that way, and it's improving you just to think and feel that sort of way. Is there anything else you would add to how to rewire your brain, how to flip how you're experiencing things?
No, I think we covered it quite well. I think I just appreciate the opportunity. Again, I think this conversation is an example of what we've been talking about around like the longer we talk about it, the more clear it gets, the more examples we have. And it would be almost impossible to like think about or insert something different than this because we've spent so much time building this kind of a thing. So I just think it's this is a good example of what we're talking about.
Yeah, that's true. Well, I hope that's helpful.
Thanks, everybody. Let us know what you think about this idea of rewiring your brains, and let us know what successes you have in trying to do this. If you think of somebody else who might benefit from hearing this or watching this video, please share it with them. It means a lot to us when you do that. And also like and share this wherever possible. And until next time, we'll see you later.